and thank you for joining me for this webinar. My name is Chris Cox, and I'm one of the cybersecurity instructors here at CDSE. I'm very excited to be talking to you about incident response today because I think it's an important topic that can be easy to overlook. In fact, in 2014, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, evaluated 6 agencies: DOE, DOJ, DOT, HUD, NASA, and the VA. Only 3 of those surveyed had trained incident response personnel on staff, and only 2 had actually tested their plan. And of those 2, they had only tested it partially. The private sector is about the same, with less than half having an incident response plan at all. Today we'll be talking about why that's a problem and what we can do to reverse that trend in our organizations. But first, before we begin, I'd like to open up with a poll question. Does your organization have an incident response plan, at least that you know of? Just go ahead and take a moment to answer the question on there. We can kind of figure out where we all stand and where our experiences in this room with the incident response plans. I'm seeing quite a few responses coming in, wide range, and I appreciate all of the responses. It looks like, generally speaking, a large percentage do not have an incident response plan at all, with 31% and climbing. And just below that are those that have an incident response plan, but the users have not yet been trained, meaning there's a plan in place, which is very good, but the users don't necessarily know what their roles or responsibilities are. And about an even split as far as yes, but it hasn't been tested, and yes, but it's been trained and tested, which of course is the pinnacle of what we're talking about today, having the plan in place, having it tested, and having the users trained on their responsibilities. So I'd like to follow that up with another poll question. All the answers have come in. As far as, has your organization had a cybersecurity incident within the past year? So at some point within 2015, 2016, the time frame, within the last year, has your organization actually had any sort of incident coming through? Now, how you define incident, that could be a malware attack, that can be viruses that come in through your network or impact some network segments. That can be a hack, that can be an insider, maybe inappropriate usage of resources. We'll talk a little bit more about what US CERT defines as an incident, the different categories of that. But generally speaking, I'd say that most organizations out there, on average, have had some sort of incident happen within the last year or so. And so in this case, we've had almost half, about 41%, have had some sort of cybersecurity incident happen within the last year. So of course, at that point, when the incident happens, that's when you would refer to your incident response plan, and that's when you would make sure that the plan has been updated after that point as well. So thank you very much, and let's move on. So let's take a look at one possible scenario. It's one that you might have seen before, especially those that have had some sort of incident happen within the last year, or maybe one that you've heard of happening within another organization. It starts with something funky, weird, or strange happening. Maybe the computer's been crashing, or the hard drive's been overactive or running out of hard drive space. Maybe an alert comes up, or the users suddenly find themselves with some unknown problems on the computer. They're all things that they probably should recognize as potential indicators of issues. But in this scenario, the user doesn't recognize those signs and symptoms. They don't know they have a virus. Now, everyone here by now should know that antivirus programs aren't 100% effective. That's why you need that user layer inserted in which they can recognize the issues that the antivirus might miss. So as a result, the malware is able to spread to other systems and other network segments before it's detected. Cleanup takes a lot longer, and the costs are higher, and there may be significant network outages or business impact because of it. Now let's take a look at the way that things are supposed to work. The user sees one of those funky, weird, or strange events, but they know what to look for, and they know their roles and responsibilities under the incident response plan. So of course they report it right away, and the computer security incident response team, or whatever you choose to name that capability, is able to act much sooner in the process. As a result, there's minimal business impact. I'm sure we'd agree that it's a lot better to reimage or repair a single computer than to deal with an entire infected network segment. And that's what it's really all about. The goal of incident response plan is to address and manage a cyber incident while limiting the damage and reducing the recovery time and costs. In other words, the goal of the plan is to help the organization avoid a serious security issue by properly managing incidents when they do occur. Other programs will help to prevent incidents, but every user is involved in incident response in one way or another. The important thing is that the incident response plan is defined and tested before an incident, not developed after one. It takes time to develop and test a plan, and valuable time will be lost if the plan is being developed after the signs of an incident have already been discovered. Now, your organization may already have something like an incident response plan, even if it's not geared towards computer or network-related incidents. But that isn't too different from a physical security response plan, in spirit at least. Think about a physical security incident. Maybe there's a break-in, a window gets smashed. That event is detected and an alert is activated. The guards are able to quickly determine if that's actually a security incident, and the right people, maybe the guards or police, are contacted and they act to stop the incident. When it comes to a physical incident, there's a greater likelihood of actually catching and prosecuting the perpetrator, which isn't always possible with a cyber attack, which can originate from anywhere in the world. And in both cases, there's discussion afterwards on how to keep it from happening again. So in both cases, we're seeing events, alerts, and incidents. Let's take a closer look at what those terms mean and see what we're talking about in terms of cybersecurity. There are three basic concepts that fall under the umbrella of a cybersecurity issue, and they increase in severity. The first is an event, which is a change in the normal behavior or environment. This isn't always a bad thing. It's just something that happens on a system or a network. Installing updates or software, or logging on or off a system, those are all examples of events. Some events generate an alert, which is when a responsible party is told that a particular event has occurred. This could just be logged and stored on a server, or it could be sent to a particular department or individual, sometimes directly if it's something that they're looking out for. For example, maybe log-on and log-on events are logged so you know who's using a system at any particular time, or an alert can be generated if someone accesses a system outside of their normal duty hours. But remote access, outside of the working hours, that might need a different type of alert, especially if it's routine. An incident is where you have an actual problem, when a malicious event has occurred that needs to be detected, addressed, and remediated. So again, an event is a thing, not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that happens that can be the result of a malicious action, normal system operation, or an unrelated incident or problem. For example, a reboot or a server crash are both events. Network congestion and even certain types of system input from devices or sensors can also be an event. This is what a security analyst is looking at when reviewing system logs. In the Windows operating system, for example, the event viewer collects and displays all sorts of events that may or may not be of interest to the analyst. The problem with reviewing event logs is there's a lot of them. A lot happens on a computer that we aren't always aware of from a user perspective. So the challenge is to determine which of the events may indicate an incident is underway or has occurred while filtering out false positives. And an incident is when something's actually happened or is happening at that moment. It's when the glass breakage turns into a burglary, or when software installation turns into a malware infection. Relative to our incident response plan and program, these are the things that have to be planned for, trained, and the resources have to be put in place to reduce the impact and stop it as soon as possible. This is what makes the news. This is where you risk becoming a statistic. Incidents have increased almost 40% from 2014 to 2015. And we're just talking about data breaches. They can cost a company $154 per record on average. You can imagine that number going up as the breach continues. And there's plenty of time for it, since it takes an average of 200 days to detect a successful breach. So the priority should be eliminating the threat and recovering quickly.
Please stand by for a second. We're having some connectivity issues. Please stand by.
Okay, I apologize for that. It appears that we're back. So I'll continue. So because we do understand that it takes so much time to detect a successful breach, and because the cost could be so high per incident, the priority becomes on eliminating the threat and recovering quickly in order to reduce those costs. But despite that, 2/3 of CIOs and CISOs surveyed by the cybersecurity company CyberArk feel that their senior leaders don't view cybersecurity as a strategic priority. Your organization might define incidents differently, but a good guideline for security incident categories can be found within the DoD. This is the same set of definitions used elsewhere, such as the U.S. Computer Emergency Response Team, or U.S. CERT. First, we have unauthorized access when someone gains logical or physical access without permission. And a denial of service attack is when an attacker successfully impairs the normal function of a system or a network. Malicious code, one of the ones we're often most familiar with, is when malicious software successfully infects an operating system or an application. Now specifically, according to U.S. CERT and DoD guidelines, it's not a reportable incident if the antivirus successfully stops the actual infection, if it successfully catches it at that point and quarantines it. Improper usage is the violation of policy, such as the acceptable use policy that governs system access. Scans, probes, and attempted access are precursors to an attack and may be detected early on. And finally, unconfirmed events are those that are still under investigation when the type is not yet known. There's also a category 0, which is used internally for an organization during exercises or when the specific category isn't yet known. When an incident is detected, the most pressing concern is notification. It's critical that the notification process is in place to notify responsible entities as quickly as possible, so that hopefully damage can be avoided. Or if it can't be avoided, fixed as soon as possible. The longer that an incident is allowed to happen, the more difficult it will be to contain it. And naturally, the risk to the network increases depending on the nature of the issue. For example, an event, if properly logged and identified, can allow the organization to stop an incident before it occurs, saving manpower and money. That's assuming that the organization has the mechanisms in place to do so. That's why an incident response plan is so important. It defines what needs to be reported and how to report it, so there's not time lost while trying to figure out what needs to be done. So in developing an incident response plan, the organization will develop a plan based on the nature of the threat and the methods for exploitation that they're likely to employ. It should be as comprehensive as possible, while still being useful to the users or other responsible parties. Of course, different versions of the plan may be distributed to general users, first responders, or other parties, depending on their role in the organization. Then employees need to be made aware of their responsibilities and what to look out for. This can be done through training and awareness initiatives. Plans need to be tested in order to make sure that the users can perform the required functions and that the plan works for the environment and that the resources are available where they need to be and when. The process is repeated to make sure that it remains accurate and relevant and that changes to the organization are accounted for. To put it simply, plan how to respond to incidents, make sure that what the users know to look out for and what to do, test the plan, and update it regularly. Ultimately, the plan needs to be tailored for your organization. It's really not hard to find templates online or examples shared between organizations, but one size does not fit all. But there's a few basic qualities that your plan needs to cover. It needs to provide an easy-to-follow roadmap for incidents and take into account the structure of the incident response team and the personnel available. It also needs to provide a high-level approach to incident response that can be understood at all levels, from leadership down to users, while also being specific to the organization. It has to define which incidents are reportable, which we've already discussed, while also allowing the capability to be measured and tested. It has to specify which of the resources are available to the team and the role of management. It should be signed by senior leadership, if possible, in order to help ensure compliance and demonstrate support at all levels. And finally, it needs to be integrated across the different business or mission elements. An incident doesn't happen in a vacuum, and the plan has to account for that in order to be effective. This list, of course, isn't exhaustive, but ensuring those elements will help to make sure that yours is as comprehensive as possible. The general process for incident response, which should be reflected in any plan, is to first report the incident. Users should be encouraged to report even suspected incidents, even though that might result in a certain number of false positives. That way, qualified technical personnel can assess the report and determine if an actual incident has occurred. If it has, the first priority is generally containment, that is, stopping the spread of whatever has occurred. That might be isolating portions of the network to avoid the spread of malware, or stopping an attacker from leveraging their access to pivot to other parts of the network. Then the analyst can start to determine the severity of the incident by looking for other signs of what may have occurred. Then steps are taken to preserve any evidence in case law enforcement intervention is required as a result of the incident. And external agencies are notified if required. The network or systems are recovered from known good backups or clean media, and the damage and cost for remediation is calculated. Through the entire process, all of the steps and findings are documented to capture the lessons learned and allow for replication, and that information is used to update user training and organizational policies. It's important to note that some steps may be done simultaneously or in different order if required. For example, the loss of certain information may require immediate external agency notification, and preservation of evidence may need to be done at all stages, such as by leaving a system in its operating state. This is why each organization needs to come up with their own specific policies and procedures for dealing with incidents that applies to their environment. But now let's be frank. We're talking about something that takes a great deal of coordination across the entire organization, something that may require additional funding or additional training, something that your senior leadership has to care about in order to be truly effective. Maybe your leadership already does care about cybersecurity and incident response and understands how protecting the systems and networks provides a strategic benefit. Or maybe the organization also understands the benefits of protecting customer records and maintaining their confidence. An effective incident response plan effectively does both. But there's the additional benefit of helping to keep your business out of the news. When associated with data breaches or other negative events, it's hard to think of some business names or their logos without remembering the news coverage that came with their own breaches. That's not to say there are any deficiencies in their incident response plan or security procedures, but having an incident response plan can help to minimize the possibility that you'll be joining them in the headlines. So I'd like to take a moment to share some of the key elements that I've observed in organizations that I've been in or worked with, and some that I found have worked more effective in order to have an incident response capability. Some of these we've already talked about, but they're the things that I would ask you to take a very close look at when you set up your own program or draft your own plan. First, make sure that leadership is on board. They're looking at the organization from an overall strategic perspective and may even have a unique input which you hadn't considered yet. But at a minimum, having their signature will help with support down the road. Figure out which of the scenarios are more likely to occur and plan for them specifically. For example, a virus infection is pretty likely to occur at some point. So that can be mapped out and that can be addressed ahead of time in order to make sure that everyone knows their roles when it does occur. Define the process for making major decisions, such as shutting down the network or portions of it. And make sure that all users know their role and the plan for things they may encounter. Look for bottlenecks in the process. Is there only one person that can make a certain decision? What happens if an office door is locked, but that user's system is infected? And exercise the plan to make sure that it works. You may be familiar with the crawl, walk, run approach. Read through the plan to make sure that you have the right resources and that it covers everything you need. Walk through it with key users and actually test it at full speed. And finally, periodically review the plan to make sure that it's still accurate and updated as needed. I'd like to take a moment to open up the room and see if anyone has anything else to add. What have you encountered or what have you observed that may help others as they develop their own programs? Okay, and as you think about that, as you consider some of the things that you may have encountered that could help your peers and your colleagues in this aspect, I would really like to highlight the importance of senior leadership support when it comes to drafting an incident response plan. Having them involved at all levels does help you to get that overall organizational approach that can bridge the different gaps or bridge the different mission elements. So for example, as I had highlighted before, is that when an incident happens, it's unlikely to affect only one segment of the network or one of the business elements in the organization. So when it does when it does affect other portions, there's already that process in place. There's already that senior leader perspective in order to make sure there's support in getting that remediated as quickly as possible. And I do see some responses coming through, so I'll continue to hold the room. I'd also like to mention the importance or highlight the importance of training and exercising. It's a very good thing to have that plan on paper, especially if it can be referred to after the fact. But if it's exercised, as they say, train as you fight, to the point where the users reflexively know what their responsibilities are, where they reflexively know what to do when they encounter an incident, you're going to cut incident response time drastically. I worked with one particular organization, some duty stations back, in which when I came to the organization, there was no incident response time plan. Every virus was like the first time previous to my arrival. So the wheel kept getting reinvented. Once we put an actual plan in place, the malware infections became something more of an inconvenience than a major issue each and every time. So I do see a couple responses that came through. One from Robert: training and exercise are important, as is senior leadership support. However, training exercises come with a price. How do you sell the cost? And that is a great question. And really, it's a matter of, it's an investment is what it is, particularly for those organizations which have had an incident in the past. It's fairly easy to look at that and to point to the manpower costs associated with it, to say we spent this much time remediating the event, whereas we could have cut it down significantly by following the plan. The other aspect of it comes in the form of public relations or customer confidence. When they look at the organization, depending on the nature of your organization, when an incident becomes public, there's always a certain response from the customer base. They look at how it's handled, and either it's handled effectively and their information is kept safe, or you potentially lose customers because they don't have confidence in your ability to maintain their records. So really, it's a matter of finding out what is important to your senior leadership and coaching it in that sense. And that's why bringing them early in the conversation can help you to determine what their priorities are and how an incident response plan can address those. And then another question through: what nuanced lessons learned do you have to share that apply to red and black environments? I'd assume that the question, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, that the question is more tied into incidents that cut across hit both the high side and the low side. And of course, I don't need to tell you that's a very serious incident when it does occur. Some of us remember several years back there was an incident that's very...
We're still live on audio, Chris, so go ahead while the room resets.
Okay, we are live on audio and we are being recorded again. I apologize for that, but I will continue. Some of us remember there was an incident that happened some years back in which the particular piece of malware was designed to cut across the red and the black side. And at that point, once that was seen, something that a lot of the senior leadership hadn't quite encountered before, that was very eye-opening for a wide range of leaders that are still in senior leadership positions or are now coming into senior leadership positions. It was something that had been hypothetical but hadn't really seemed to have a mission impact. I'd say it's an easier sell when we're talking about the high side in terms of the mission impact that occurs when something like that is impacted. So in terms of coaching for mission impact and continuity, that's a conversation that can happen because we've already seen what happened in the past when that occurred. And then Stephen adds, I would encourage reporting of all system anomalies, no matter how minor you think they may be. And I could not agree more. That's a great perspective to have. And if the users have that perspective, you're going to catch incidents much earlier than if they're trying to make the adjudication, this is an issue versus no, this is not an issue. So my perspective from coming to it on that side as far as the Tier 1 support or the IA offices that are actually investigating these incidents, I would much rather have a false positive than missing any number of actual incidents. So that's certainly something that should be passed on to the users. That's the perspective that they should come away with, is that if there's anything funky, weird, or strange that they observe, especially if it meets certain patterns that they've been trained on, they should report that and allow others to make that determination. And Paul brings up a very good point that end-user security awareness training cannot be overstated, and absolutely it cannot. I like to say if we accept the fact that cyber warfare is a real thing, if there really is such a thing called cyber warfare, that there's an adversary trying to get to our data, that cyberspace is, as Congress said, the fifth domain of warfare, then we have to accept that it's the end users that are on the front lines of that war. So just like any frontline soldiers, we need to make sure that they understand their role. We need to make sure they understand what's expected of them and that they understand what they need to do to be safe on the network, and more importantly, to keep our data and our network safe. It's a huge strategic advantage to have that intelligence, that information sharing. Our adversaries know that and would like nothing more than to impede that. That's our asset, and that's what they're trying to impede. So most definitely is that end-user security awareness is, in my estimation, among the more important concepts related to incident response. So one more that came through, what are your candid thoughts on the hardware side of this equation? That is a big question, a very good question, and I think you're talking more along the line of supply chain risk management and the supply chain security side. We're seeing more and more that that's becoming a factor, and that there realistically are exploits and there's ways the adversary, however you define the adversary, can get in and can actually impact our networks. That's why it's important that we start looking at all aspects of supply chain risk management, because once we put something on the network, or once we connect a computer or something like that, and we don't know where it comes from, then we essentially have to give up that much of a measure of security. I remember some years back I had a conversation with someone in Dell who had a piece in developing their supply chain risk management. And they were aware of the fact they were buying the different parts from different organizations that was primarily based on price to provide a lower cost to the customer. When they got the concept, when they got the idea that they need to make sure that each of the components are tracked, that they have security alongside the way, that became a major program for them, and quite frankly, one that should be emulated in any organization that's piecing a network together, that's acquiring hardware. So definitely it's a matter of having trusted suppliers. Depending on where it comes from, you might not necessarily be able to trust the component. So thank you very much for those sharing that information and for contributing to that discussion. So we did talk about events and incidents, like the broken glass that becomes an intrusion or the software installation that becomes a malware infection. We talked about developing an incident response process and developing plans. We talked about when and where you should develop an incident response capability and why having one is a benefit from both a strategic and a tactical perspective. And we shared some of the lessons learned. We had some great conversation about how you can better provide for an incident response capability in your organization. Much of this can be found and supported by the Cybersecurity Toolkit available on the CDSE website. And there you'll find resources and listings of the policies that apply to incident response, such as the ODA Process Manual, DODM 5200.01, and CNSSI 1001. So we do have time for questions, so I'd like to take a few minutes to answer some of those questions or have some discussions or share anything else that may not have been addressed here. So please do feel free to bring in anything that comes there. I'll take a moment to see if anyone has anything else that they want to add. I would like to echo and highlight some of the comments that did come through in the previous slide, particularly about end-user security awareness training. For those of you in DoD, there's certainly something that there's certainly a requirement for that per DoD regulation, per the cybersecurity regulations. For those of you in industry that happen to deal with DSS, in terms of your facility clearance and everything else, you're aware that there are requirements about end-user training under the NISPOM. And of course, for those of you that maybe with academia or other companies or other organizations, I think we can see, and I think we've all reached the conclusion throughout this conversation, that having an incident response plan, the importance of that cannot be overstated. And it's certainly something that has a mission and a business impact regardless of the nature of your organization. So it looks like there's no additional questions coming in, which is good. I think that we've had that conversation, that we're all on the same page on that. But if you do have any other questions, please reach out to the cybersecurity team at cybersecurity.training@dss.mil. I do want to thank you again for spending time with me today, and I hope you got something out of it. I know I did from the conversations that had happened. I'd like to invite you to stick around after the presentation ends to take a brief survey, which will help us to improve our webinars and discover other things that we can offer to you. Until next time.
Excuse me, Chris. We do have a couple questions that just popped in.
Oh, wonderful.
The first question is for industry. What is the end-user training you are referencing?
Okay, great. For industry, assuming that you're under the National Industrial Security Program, the NISP, I would refer you to the NISPOM. Your information, your IS rep or your ISSP should be able to point you into some specific direction. However, there is a requirement under the NISPOM to have initial and periodic user awareness training, which should cover the threats unique to that organization and general cybersecurity concepts. So again, your IS rep and your ISSP should be able to point you to the specific requirements or define the requirements for your organization, which can also be referenced in the NISPOM. So thank you for that question.
And can you also provide the URL for the cybersecurity toolkit?
I will go back to the previous slide, which does not have it there. I apologize for that. It is on the CDSE website, which is cdse.edu. The website has recently been reorganized, so it's very easy to navigate, but you can go to the cybersecurity section of that website where you can find the cybersecurity toolkit and some of the other courses that we have available as well for cybersecurity or the other disciplines you may be interested in. I'd like to highlight on the cybersecurity toolkit the incident response section, which has some of our incident response courses, some of the guiding regulations, which I've referenced. We also have some other elements, such as a new social media section, which includes our social media smart cards. I'd imagine that a great number of your users in the organization, probably many people in this room, have some sort of social media account, Facebook or Twitter, which are the two smart cards that we have currently. So it helps you to understand the different settings and the different configurations that will help maintain your, keep your social media account as secure as possible. It's recently been updated to reflect the new Facebook security settings as well. So thank you for that question, and I think Nancy is providing that resource as well.
Yes, Chris. I believe if you click on the cdse.edu, and if you click on resources, there's a direct link to all of the toolkits that are available, and I believe they'll find the cybersecurity under that link as well.
Great. All right, so once again, I would like to thank you for spending the time with me today and talking about incident response. I hope that those organizations, as we talked about in the beginning, that don't yet have an incident response plan, have an understanding or have a greater appreciation for the importance of having one, and have gotten some tips and some information that may help them as they create one. For those organizations that have had time to create one but haven't yet tested it, I would encourage you to take the time to test it and to train your users in their responsibilities so that if something should occur in your organization, you can cut that response time significantly. So once again, I would like to invite you to... Are we out? Oh, once again, I would like to invite you to stick around for the poll or to take this poll that will help us to better support your needs in the future. And until next time, I'm Chris Cox, reminding you to stay safe.
That concludes today's conference call. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.